This podcast was taped on May 7th, 2017. Welcome to Black Women Talk Politics. I'm Sheila Clark.
I'm Sabriya Willams.
And we are joined today by Dr. Jaime Michel.
Hello.
And we are happy to have you guys with us today. As you know, part of our show is just about the importance of Black women having discussion around what's going on politically. We're an active force. We have many an issue that concerns us. And so this show is just an opportunity for us to recap for you what's going on, to have a deep dive on an issue of relevance. So today we're talking about juvenile justice and criminal justice. And then we will hear from some of you out there who we've been talking to throughout the last few weeks. And then, of course, we always try to leave you with some action items. You know, part of the thing that we know that's most important is that we've got to be active, right? If the election hasn't taught us anything. So let's get started. Sabriya, what you got for us from this week?
Let girls learn. I think we should start with that.
Okay.
As if you don't know, it is a program that was started by our former First Lady, Michelle Obama. And it started in 2015. And the idea around it was to advance education for young women around the world, not just here, but everywhere. Just so that, as you know, we are underserved in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And we may take it for granted because we're here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And in Washington, D.C., but some parts of the United States would probably feel like third world countries as well as far as their education if we went there. So the idea was just to advance young women so we could empower. So she was trying to empower us to empower ourselves. And the private sector and government had pledged $1 billion for ongoing programs so that this can happen. And in some of the tax cuts, the Trump administration is now set to do away with this. And it's immediate because apparently there was an internal email to the Peace Corps where they are no longer they're ceasing to use the name Let Girls Learn. So that's done. And I think the bigger picture here, if we don't already see it, the theme is that we are devalued as women. We are second-class citizens. They do not, they meaning government as a whole, I don't believe want us to thrive in a way that is positive. They're not giving us anything to make us believe that. They're not making us feel good. And I'm going to tie this into healthcare too. I feel like it's an assault on our brains and our bodies.
Well, hours later, after that memo came out and there was like a lot of backlash, because of course everyone was like, first of all, everybody's like, Michelle Obama's program? Right. Like, you don't mess with Michelle Obama, first of all, I'm saying.
They try to.
I'm just saying, she's like, you don't mess with Michelle. But anyway, hours later, like, someone came out from the White House and said, oh, no, we're not touching that program. And, you have to just get, they continue to say one thing and then say
another.
something else, it's pretty obvious to me they're trying to strip anything that had the Obama name.
Absolutely.
From their, path forward. So, I think just maybe they weren't prepared for the backlash,
Well, there's always, then I think that's another, identifier of this administration. They're not prepared. They've never been prepared for the backlash, So yes, we're going to block all Muslims from coming in. Well, we're going to shut down your airports. But I'm annoyed with the reactiveness of this. So we're reactive. So right. So yes, we say we're going to take the program, and that's when we're going to be incensed, and that's when we're going to make you have to recant your statement. Why can't we just be incensed just for where we are right now? Why can't we force because now we can see we can force their hands, right? So now they're going to recant the statement. They made the statement. Now we're taking it back because we got backlash. Well, we can push. And so a lot of the stuff doesn't even have to happen in the first place.
Well, that would be the goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think the goal for us here is to try to figure out where do we strategically like galvanize our efforts and our force, right? And I think the thought behind this whole podcast was if we are really smart about it, because we're not going to be able to put. There's so much going on every single day. I mean, we're going to recap 4 or 5 issues today, and there were like 4 or 5, for the week.
400 or 500
and they were like,
more,
yeah,
right?
it's very, so, strategically, what matters most to women and communities of color, right? And we have a commitment here to try to underscore that, put it out, and then use our efforts and voices, right, to galvanize. Well, the other thing that happened this week, I think it was like a difficult week for Black men. Really, I mean, there's continues to be no justice for our children, and for our men, and so we lost another young man last week.
A child.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know he's a young man. I get what you're saying by young man, but because that's what they're saying. They're seeing a threat just because he's brown and male, but he's 15.
Yeah, he's a baby.
And so that is he's a baby. We both have sons and nephews, and I mean, we got people that we know who are this age, and they're not men.
No, right. Right, they're little boys,
Right.
and I mean, and this one was like, as a mother, we're not going to go here over and over like today, but as a mother, as a wife, as a person committed to the development of our young Black men and our older Black men, it just, when I see lives discarded so insensitively, like this young man, he and his friends were at a party like teenagers do. The cops came. Folks got in the car. They were out, right? I mean, this is what people do.
Which is generally what the police want you to do.
Disperse, right? That's what they
disperse. They want you to leave. They do not want to have to deal with you and your mom and your dad. They want you to leave the party, ideally. Yeah. Quietly, just go.
Right, so he's leaving. Him and his friends are leaving. The second officer on the scene, so not even the first officer on the scene, right? Because the first officer on the scene, you would think would recognize if there was imminent danger, right? And you but it was the second officer on the scene that came and shot at the car, and then hit Jordan, who was in the passenger seat, in the head. So I'm like, it's crazy, right? So
and then lied.
Yeah.
And then lied.
Mm-hmm. Well, they always lie.
Lied.
Right, because they said it was the car was backing up towards them, right?
And that was the official report.
And I think they lie like this because it's been demonstrated that if you even suggest that the victim was an aggressor, then you'll get off, right? So that's what happens, right? So this prompted a lot of outrage, right? And so I was happy to see Texas, surprisingly Texas, go ahead and say that they were going to pursue, conviction for this guy. The guy turned himself in on Friday. I think he was released on bail for $300,000 or something like that. So, I'm hopeful, but really, again, this is like 1 in a million, it feels like. And, like, here's the thing.
Because they'll always show us something, they'll always surprise us, right? Because every time, nobody should, when you think about it, none of these should, I mean, most of these that we talk about, the Trayvon Martins, even though that wasn't a police officer, they shouldn't have gotten off, right? So you get surprised and shocked and realize, we are still here. Our lives do not matter, and more importantly, these boys' lives mean nothing.
Yeah, and with that, like, okay, so the Washington Post has been doing a good job. They have this tracking database. So this teenager, this child, he was the youngest child that was shot by police in 2017, but there have been 339 people that have been shot and killed by police so far in 2017. We're only in month 5 of 2017, right? And at least 10 people were under the age of 18. So somebody's child, right? And so, according to the Post, since January 2015, the police nationwide have killed 193 people who were inside of their vehicles at the time that they were shot. So they were in the vehicle, right? So there was there was a car between them and the officer at a minimum, right? And in 86 of those cases, the officers say the person was in possession of a weapon. But in 76 cases, the person killed was armed only with the vehicle itself.
So I guess that what they're saying with the vehicle itself is that they were trying to use it in an aggressive manner. So with those cases, you just don't know, right? Because the person in the car could have been, we don't know these cases. But this case, Jordan Edwards, we do know it. We know that he was driving away from the scene. He was going home.
He was the passenger. I mean, that's the other thing. Not only was he driving away, he wasn't even the driver.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He wasn't even the driver. There were, according to the same article by the Post, in at least 17 cases, police acknowledged that the person killed was in the act of fleeing, was a passenger in the vehicle, or was in a vehicle that was not in motion and did not pose a threat. So, I mean, we just have we have a crisis. We've had a crisis. And when we talk about Jeff Sessoms and others, I think that it's just one of those things where, what's going to happen. And that kind of leads us to Alton Sterling, right? So that's why I said this was quite a week for our men, right, who have been unjustly killed, right? And so we have Jordan, and now we have, Alton, who DOJ has told us that they're not going to pursue criminal charges against the officers, right? So remember, Alton was killed in July of 2016.
Right, Baton Rouge.
He was 37. He was in Baton Rouge. He was being held down, right, by police officers and shot at close range. And this was all about selling CDs outside of a store or something like that. And, of course, they said he had a gun. Yeah. They always say he had a gun. And a lot of people recorded it, so the force, again, of social media and Facebook Live and all that stuff. And so there was lots and lots of protests. But, it's just, again, I mean, I think now what we saw here in Alton Sterling is what we're used to seeing. Yeah, and that's the thing that's so messed up about it. It's like, oh, okay, police not charged. And, it's really, it's really disheartening and scary.
Which is why Jordan Edwards, while he's been charged with murder, doesn't mean he's going to be convicted.
No, Jordan, you're talking about the other cop. Yeah,
yes, the other police officer, right. So, there were no even charges filed here, so that's done. Yeah. But just because he was charged in the Jordan Edwards case doesn't mean that there's anything that's going to come of it.
Well, here's what Jeff Sessoms says: it could reduce the morale of police officers if they're charged criminally.
He should talk to the morale of some of these black mothers and these black boys.
Right. And
then maybe he would get a better understanding of the morale in the African American community.
Yeah, which is like, as we were discussing before the show, raising black boys, I think that the mainstream white audience doesn't understand, or maybe they do, but I feel like, I have to explain every day to people why I have to go over and over and over and over and over with my son. I need you to get it. Like, I need you to think twice as hard, because you don't have the luxury
and you
of
don't
making
have a
mistake.
You don't even have a tween, right? So you have yours is 8
right.
years old, right?
But he weighs 75 pounds, and he's and so like he might be. Well, I just always go back to Trayvon Martin,
right?
Who was 12.
Right. No, he wasn't 12. Trayvon was 17, but the
I mean, Tamir Rice. Excuse me, I meant Tamir Rice. Sorry, thank you for
playing in the park.
I mean, just Tamir Rice and him being 12 years old.
Yeah.
Blew me away.
Yeah.
It blew me away. So I'm just.
So I have a 7-year-old son too. I mean, I get it. It's, but you want them. So we moved into a different area in DC that's supposed to be, really quote unquote nice area, and he goes and he plays outside by himself. But I swear to God, every time he says, "Mommy, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to play by myself," and this is why we moved here, right? I get a knot in my stomach until he walks back in the door. And not because, something bad is going to happen. Well, not because I think he's going to do something. Right. I think that he's going to be perceived as doing something. Oh, right. I mean, and that's horrible. What do you do with that? Right. I don't want you to do this because I'm perceiving this. I can't. How do I explain that to him? And he's literally playing basketball in the alley off our yard. That's it. Right. So.
Yeah, it's really frightening. So
that's where we are.
Yeah. So the other major thing from this week was, drumroll,
healthcare. So now we're gonna go back. I'm doing, I guess, women, and you're doing the men, and so I guess it was just an assault on the black family. Like I said, so the Let Girls Learn was an assault on women's, our minds, and now. Healthcare is a major assault on all of us, but there are definitely some things here that women are like, we need to be aware of. But I do want to quote Trump, who is the president of the United States.
Or 45, as 45. The man that names stays unnamed.
Right.
Whatever they say in Harry Potter.
Right. Those who do not speak up. Health healthcare process has unified the GOP. We've developed a bond. This has really brought the Republican Party together.
This is Trump's words.
These are his words after the House passed the bill. My issue with this is that this is the divisive, right? He is the president, and so he should be wanting to unify the country. And yet here we are again, and he is still rallying and campaigning for an office that he owns instead of campaigning for the country that he's leading. And this is my problem. And this then becomes the big problem with this bill. So it's pre-existing conditions, tax cuts for the top, 5%. I mean, so they're going to benefit. But if you've had a baby, if you have Alzheimer's, if you've had cancer, so I'm naming things that directly apply to me and mine. So my sister is a breast cancer survivor. My mother is a breast cancer survivor living with Alzheimer's. I have had a child. So, and I have a uterus. So pretty much anything else. I mean, and so these are things that we are, and this is, so the poor, the old, that's who are going to be, because they'll raise our premiums. We're working class. We'll suck it up. It's going to be painful, but we'll make up, the extra $4,000 if that's what it's going to be annually. And we're not going to be happy about it. Right. But what about my mother who is not even fit? Our income is her income. So not only am I doing my $4,000, I'm doing whatever the amount is going to be for her. So what about the people who live in Woodstock, Alabama? What about those people who are poor already and can't, so they don't need to be forced to get health care anymore, suppose. But then what does that mean when they go to the emergency room, which they now can be possibly denied, where before emergency rooms would have to take you? So these are possible changes, the things that people aren't even recognizing, and the most disenfranchised and despaired are going to be affected. And I just would employ everybody to read up on the American Health Care Act and see how it's going to directly affect you. Read the fine print.
Well, if you're talking about reading, even the House of the Representatives didn't even read it. Right. Like they had several representatives that went on air and they said, "I didn't read it. Right. I didn't have time." Yet I voted for it. I voted for $880 billion to be cut from Medicaid. Yeah. I voted for 24 million people to lose their health insurance. They didn't have a CBO score, so Congressional Budget Office score. So and when Obamacare came out, so like some of the media has been showing like these same people, Paul Ryan, talking about how irresponsible it would be for Obamacare to pass because people haven't had time to read it. There's a lot of denial, I think, on the parts of Republicans.
It's the syndrome of I won. So it doesn't matter what I said before.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Now I've won.
Oh yeah.
This is what I'm saying now. Yeah. And so know your representatives, know who voted for what. There are 20 Republicans that opposed this. All Democrats in the House opposed. So I think you should know your folks. So you need to know them by name and know who to talk to.
Yeah.
Because 2018, literally, you may not want to vote for them again because they do not have your best interest at heart.
Right. There was a town hall meeting recently where a guy, one of the representatives, came out and said, well, no one dies because they don't have health insurance or something stupid like
right,
that.
Yeah.
Just something really ridiculous, and I think, again,
and that's exactly why people die.
Here's the whole notion, right? The whole notion is how they're going to control for this penalty. Is you don't pay a penalty. You don't pay your insurance premium, right? Because you don't have any money. Because you don't have any money. Because you're sick, right? And you might have had to use your money to go get like food, something that's not covered by any insurance, like I don't know, acupuncture, whatever, just hypothetically, right? So you don't have any money, so you're off of the insurance, right? So then when you come back on, how they're going to make up the money that versus the penalty is they're going to like triple or something your cost to get back on. So you probably didn't have any money. It's not like most people are like, well, I just think I won't pay my health insurance bill again. You know what I mean? It's like,
it's not a choice.
Right. So the notion that you're going to have 3 times the amount or 30% more, whatever it is ridiculous. Right. And then they talk about there's going to be these extra subsidies and this and that help. It's just.
It doesn't make sense.
No, it does. And also, I was looking at a spreadsheet this morning was talking about how people who make under 50,000 will definitely pay more.
Yes,
and people that make over 200,000 will pay less.
That's what I'm saying. It's a 5%. So I mean, you have these laws that are focused and geared toward people who are making money, because that's what we have in office. We have a man who's geared towards and focused is to make money, and that's what he's done. And so, and he believes that, look, if you can't, I did it. If you can't, he's a birther, right? So if it's my birthright to do this and be here, and if you didn't, then okay. Right. And he talks a good game when he's at their rallies and pumps everybody up. But then when the rubber hits the road and the pen hits the paper, he demolishes everything that, the poor and the disenfranchised and the people that don't look like and act like him are here. I mean, it's...
Well, I think, one thing that we know is going to happen based on all the things I've been seeing is that the Senate's going to write their own bill.
Cross your fingers.
That keeps coming up. So I think hopefully there's quite a few senators that have talked about their concern and this and that. I don't know if they're really that concerned of, folks power trip and they want their own bill and everything. But so I think it's really important to look at the places where there's a lot of potential for harm, and really act up over, making sure that your representatives are aware. This Medicaid thing is humongous.
Pre-existing conditions are humongous because they're literally a splinter is a pre-existing condition. I mean, honestly, if you read it, it's so I mean, these are two things, and I think that is a lot of the bill. Yep. And so we have to be woke.
And we have to have a budget score. I mean, this notion of you're going to vote for stuff and have, like in the last one, they said 24 million people wouldn't be covered, right? Like, you have to know how much this is going to cost, because that's just foolish. Who buys it? Who goes with the store? You don't know how much money you have in your pocket. You don't know how much it costs. It's foolishness. So, I mean, this is going to be something to watch
closely,
and really be very active about.
Because in one way or another, most of us will be affected. Most of us are with however the health care bill is massaged and is worked out, we're all going to be affected by it. So that is definitely something that we need to just read up on and get intimately involved with it.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, we are going to turn to our guest segment right here. We have Dr. Jaime Michel, and Jaime is a expert on juvenile justice, and she's been working in the field for some time. So, Jaime, thanks for coming out.
Welcome.
Hello.
Appreciate
Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. We are glad you're here talking politics with us. So why don't you share a little bit about your background?
Let's see. I've been involved in the juvenile justice world for about 15 years at the sort of different domains, right? Sort of the practice direct service domain, the policy domain, and the research domain. And I first got involved being a social worker in the public defender's office in San Francisco. And I was there for a few years and decided I wanted to take it to the next level and decided to go get a PhD in psychology. So came out here to UVA, where I focused on adolescent development and how it intersects with the law. Particularly how adolescent development intersects with issues specific to juvenile justice. So, and that was about that. And since then, I've just been kind of working in different domains, some in the policy domain, some in did a little bit more practice work again, working with dual status kids. That means kids who have status in both the juvenile justice and the child welfare system. Mm-hmm. And now just doing some kind of policy data stuff.
Okay. All right. So, Jaime, one of the things we were talking about before the show is that juvenile justice has kind of been changing, and so I think one of the first things to kind of give us a sense of is like, tell us a little bit about it, and how it's changed in particular over the last 20 years.
So, and again, just sort of to give context to sort of your conversation you were having about healthcare, I think the biggest thing is when we think about where we've come in the last 20 years with juvenile justice is fear of the backslide, right? Like, I feel like that's the theme, right?
Absolutely.
With Trump is like, what's the backslide going to look like? And so just to kind of, give a little bit of information around juvenile justice reform and what's been happening. So I think people are pretty familiar with the 80s and 90s and the Get Tough on Crime, right? And that was where we saw a lot of laws put in place that would automatically transfer kids to the adult system. Just overall, the juvenile justice system, which is supposed to be more rehabilitative than the adult system, got more punitive. And so a lot of folks stepped up to try to push back on that. And when I say punitive, just to be very clear, that obviously being punitive in the juvenile justice system, which is primarily made up of Black and brown children. Right? So it was a way of criminalizing Black and brown children. So I just want to be clear that when we talk about juvenile justice, at least for me, and poor children, I will put poor children as well. I really want to be clear, like my focus on juvenile justice has primarily to do with the level of disenfranchisement that Black, brown, and poor children experience through it. So anyway, so that punitive era, you had folks pushing back against it. And there were some big initiatives that some of the big foundations, the MacArthur Foundation started the Models for Change work, which included work in specific states to reform their juvenile justice systems in different ways, to look at racial disparities, to look at community-based alternatives for kids, to look at, or other things that to look at mental health, juvenile defense, strengthening juvenile defense. And they also had, what I think was really key, was they also had a big research network where they started pushing, or funding serious scholars about, like adolescence, what makes it different? What makes kids different from adults? And so if we don't want to, if we want a better juvenile justice system, how do we need to think about adolescents as developmentally different? So that research played a huge role in juvenile justice reform. Also, the Casey Foundation did a lot of great work around detention reform. So that front door, kid gets arrested, they get locked up, right? So they have been involved in several jurisdictions all over the country trying to reduce the use of that front door detention. So they were very influential. And there's just been other, advocates pushing around the transfer issue, around raising the age. Some jurisdictions, some states still, kids who are 16 and 17-year-olds can get sent automatically to the adult system. So there's been a push to push for legislation to raise the age, pushes to close down prisons, juvenile prisons, at least reduce incarceration of young people. And so those have been some of the big sort of changes that have happened. And so where you really have had a lot of momentum moving to reforming, particularly I think the last 10 years, we've really started to see some great tangible results with jurisdictions and states rethinking how we treat young people who have been accused or are adjudicated or convicted of a crime.
Do you think these will be impacted by 45
in
his administration?
Right. So I think that's the big question is what kind of backslide might we experience? I think one thing to look at, or one area to look at, is what's the federal role in juvenile justice going to be? Right. So, whereas the last 20 years, particularly the last 15 years, I think you've had these big foundations and all these nonprofits playing a big role in juvenile justice reform. There was the hope that OJJDP, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, which is under DOJ, there was this hope that they were going to sort of take the mantle of juvenile justice reform and help institutionalize it and really take it to the next level. And that was in part because the administrator, the Obama administration appointed Bob Listenby as the administrator. And this was like 4 years ago. And he is a wonderful man. He came out of the public defender's office in Philadelphia, where he represented kids, for years. I think he was even head of the juvenile division or something like that. I mean, he's fabulous. And he came in and he really pushed to sort of bring in some of the work that the foundations had been doing to really talk about what does it mean to have a more developmentally appropriate juvenile justice system? What does it mean to take into account the trauma that young people have experienced? And both in the system and things that the trauma that may lead them into the system. But so we thought that he was going to start to institutionalize these reforms, and you started, I think, to see a shift, right? And maybe even in the solicitations and what they were aimed at. Now, obviously, with the election, Listenby is out. There's an acting administrator who I believe was the deputy. I believe was Listenby's deputy.
Like Indian work and things like that, like reservation work and things like that. I was looking her up.
Okay, yeah, but not. I think the concern is that I don't know if she understands juvenile justice reform to the depth and had the passion
or compassion
that that Listenby had, and so it's just really unclear what this means for the federal role. And so that's sort of one piece. We just don't know. My sense is that it's going to fall back to the states. And
that would make sense because everything, when you talk about the Republican mantra, it's this, feds do little, states do everything.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, almost at this point, with sort of Sessions at the helm of DOJ, and who knows who's going to be the acting administrator. In some ways, it might be better if it's just sort of a lame duck OJJDP, right? It just sort of keeps the status quo, puts out some solicitations, it does what it normally does, and just kind of keeps things, keeps the status quo, keeps things moving along, but it may not push us forward in sort of that reform sense and innovation and how we treat kids in the juvenile justice system. So it could fall back to the states, which there's been so much work done. So maybe, I think the states, there's still work being done. I mean, there's California just passed legislation last year to end the automatic transfer of adolescents to the adult system. Huge. That's huge. That's now kids have to but I mean it's automatic, right? They still have to go through a judge. There has to be a hearing. But that's it's probably the way it should be, right? They get a chance to argue their case to stay in the juvenile system. So, and there's some states who have been doing some good work. The Pew Charitable Trust has been working with several states that I think for the most part we consider fairly conservative, like Georgia, Kentucky, and they've gotten these major wins where they've been able to reduce or actually get the legislatures in these states to basically limit which kids can be locked up. So kids who have status offenses, kids who have been convicted of misdemeanors.
So, and just for clarification, status offense would be a kid who's like running away or something about, because they're under the age of 18, it is a crime. Smoking is status offense, right? And misdemeanor obviously is a nonviolent type of charge. Jamie, you and I had talked a little bit about how important it was with the Supreme Court picks. And I don't think a lot of people even quite would necessarily understand how the Supreme Court has been very influential in some of these reforms that you're talking about. So, if you could kind of share a little bit about that and why it's so. He's got Gorsuch.
Yep.
But
the Supreme Court is law. So that
Yeah, so
and it's
a
paradigm. They can set this sort of paradigm, which is what they've done, particularly in the juvenile justice world. So, in terms of the juvenile justice right now, I guess the best way to explain it is, let me talk about just some of the big wins, the big cases over the last few years that have been really important for juvenile justice. So over the last 6-7 years, there's been at least 3 or 4 major cases in the juvenile justice world, which have literally, in my mind, changed juvenile justice jurisprudence, juvenile jurisprudence, just changed the paradigm, really. And a lot of it came out of, I think what really helped those cases was the research that the MacArthur Foundation funded around the developmental differences between adults and children. are in adolescence. And again, most people think of this as the brain research,
Right.
and I always like to remind people it's not just about the brain, it's also about behavior.
My
So-
niece, the frontal cortex, she always explains I'm not responsible.
right. But to understand that actually it's the behavioral research and the brain research
Right.
together, and the brain research is still fairly new. But that research really set this frame for just acknowledging developmental differences in kids. Not that kids aren't, to a certain extent, culpable for their actions, right, are responsible. It's just that we need to think of it as kind of a reduced culpability, right?
Because
Right.
their brains are still developing.
Because they're
Yeah.
still developing,
Right.
right? So a couple of the big cases have been one of them was Graham v. Florida, which essentially, this was 2010. Brian Stevenson, I believe, argued that case, who is everybody's like idol.
Brian Stevenson is awesome. Shout out to
Yes.
Brian
Brian
Stevenson.
Stevenson.
Keep doing that work you're doing. Thank you, brother.
Exactly. And so this was a case about juvenile life without parole, and essentially in this case, the Supreme Court held that non-homicide, like kids who were those under the age of 18 who were convicted of non-homicide offenses are not eligible for life without parole. So that was 2010. Huge,
Which
right?
is humongous.
Right, right.
I mean,
It's-
you life without
parole.
parole for something that no one died for is insane.
And you're 15.
At 15, I was going to say at 15. At 15,
And
I mean,
then, right,
it's-
and then you're 15. And then you're 15.
Yeah.
And no one died.
No one
Life without
you, no,
parole.
they did. They did.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right. No, it's just, I mean, the fact, to me,
That's-
that's like such a no-brainer. And the fact that just was, recently went in front of the Supreme Court. I mean,
Right.
it's huge. I mean, one thing Brian Stevenson says, I mean, I know we weren't really going here, but I love it when he says this. He says, I think you're more than the worst thing you've ever done. I thought that
Absolutely,
was
yeah.
such
That
an
is.
awesome statement,
It is.
particularly for a child, because they haven't even lived yet.
Right.
How could this,
Yeah.
But anyway, Jamie, I just wanted to, you and I had also talked a little bit. Okay, so clearly, just to wrap that part up to go to the last question, but clearly, who Trump and his administration select and push for Supreme Court justice is huge, because if we have a law and order person, if we have a person that is not in touch with the new research, who thinks science isn't real, then we will be potentially set up for some of these things to be rolled back.
And we have to understand the Supreme Court is bigger. We always think it's about, Roe versus Wade. It's not. It's bigger. So we have to expand our vision of what the Supreme Court picks are for. And it's not just that. And it is things like social justice for juveniles.
Absolutely.
And other big parts of our lives.
And it may not be as so right now with Gorsuch, he may not sway the balance, right? Because he's just replacing Scalia, who voted against these big juvenile cases anyway. But the next pick, if someone like Ginsburg or
Yeah, oh, gosh.
Kennedy, and so then there's somebody who Trump picks, then this whole paradigm that was set in motion by the current Supreme Court, that has really, I think, been it's been paradigm shifting for juvenile justice. That could shift back
change.
and backslide
And-
and impact at every level.
Which is which compounds the conversation that we were having earlier, right? It's just dangerous for people of color, poor people, if we see any of these reforms rolled back. I guess the last thing I just wanted to chat about quickly on this note was this whole, there's all this conversation about school to prison pipeline, right? And then there's person who's not our girl, Betsy DeVos,
Not our girl.
She's
not my girl.
in front
no.
of me. But so I know we're still learning about her. What's your take? I mean, maybe you, Jamie, just talking about school to prison pipeline and helping folks to understand that there's a real threat there when our kids are, kicked out of school.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that yes, the Betsy DeVos, and I'm not as tuned into education specifically, I think, as some folks. But when I think about her and how that could impact juvenile justice, and not just her, but Sessions and Trump and the law and order rhetoric, right? That narrative, the whole zero tolerance, the zero tolerance policies that I think are a huge part of this school to prison pipeline. It is. I'm not clear to what extent if the level of that of these sort of law and order practices and all the work we've done to push against zero tolerance policies, if that starts to creep back in,
Right.
All the work that's been done to put this sort of buffer right between school and prisons,
right?
It could sort of. I'm concerned that it might start to evaporate because obviously there's still a lot more work to be done on the school to prison pipeline without question, but I think folks have been really pushing against it, and it's just it's unknown, but I think it's something that we need to keep our eye on. If resources start to be taken out of public schools, if the law and order rhetoric keeps going, how is that going to influence? Because arrests have decreased, incarceration has decreased, crime in general has decreased over the last several years. So it's just unclear where this is all going to go.
Right. Okay. Well, Jaime, thank you so much. Really happy to have you here, and it's always really interesting and insightful to hear you talk. So, we're gonna have you join us as we just talk about our next segment, which is
Word on the Streets. So, Word on the Streets. We're gonna talk about the first 100 days. So, do we think it's better, worse, or the same?
And we did a little bit of just to
intel.
Yeah, we did. right. We did. We
Research.
did some. We kind of circulated around the DMV to try to get a sense from other folks as well. So we're gonna play a clip here that we got while we were at the University of Maryland a couple weeks ago, and we talked to some young ladies of color about what they thought. And so here we go. What is your impression? Has your impression changed at all?
No, it's a disaster. The administration is never a disaster.
There's never been a bigger disaster, and it can't get any worse than this.
Okay, so did you have a different? Is your opinion better, worse, or the same of him than when he was a candidate?
Pretty much the same. I expected the things that he said he was going to do. I believe that he was going to do.
Yeah,
a lot of people, a lot of people during the election, they didn't think that, the things that he was saying in terms of like the wall and, the ban and all of that. I don't think a lot of people believed it, but I believed it, I felt like he was going to do those things, and he did. So, or at least he's in the works of doing it,
Yeah, I was one of those people who didn't really believe it. I thought that the government was strong enough to kind of contain like all of his ideas, but he's carrying out everything that he wanted to do. So.
And I mean, obviously with the Republicans, they have Congress, they have they have a hold of basically all three branches. It's easier for him to carry it out. It would be different if maybe the Democrats had some sort of I don't want to say power, but some sort of leverage. I mean, you know what I mean? Something where they could be able to fight back, but they're pretty much powerless here, and it's really sad.
What would you say is the thing as you're looking forward, that concerns you the most?
I think it's foreign policy, because if you look at right now, what he's the situation with North Korea, it's really scary. He's not even using diplomacy, nothing. He's, it's very, his administration's very. It's almost as if it's like authoritarian. Like there's no sort of like, let's work on this with this country. Let's try to fix the situation that's going on. They don't really care. I'm scared that we might go to war.
And I feel like disturbs our sense of like security, because, we went from having a president who was a minority just like us. We could relate to. We felt secure. We trusted our president, and now we have such a big change.
Okay, so what did you think about that, Sabriya or Jaime? What did you think?
I mean, I thought it was interesting, and it's always great hearing from young people, because their perspectives are fresh, and it takes us back to a time when we can say, okay, that's where I was in that space in college, and especially if you're at the University of Maryland.
Shout out to
the Terps. So I agree. I mean, it's worse, right? But I think as long as 45 is there, it's worse, no matter what. Because we can't normalize him. We can't normalize him. We can't believe that this is okay. That him being in office and being divisive and throwing Budweiser parties because he's gotten his Health Care Act to the first step is normal. We can't believe that that's okay. And so as long as that is the behavior, it's always worse.
Yeah.
And so I agree with our young ladies, and I respect their fears, and I would say just keep motivating, and just move forward, and actively and consciously in social justice.
Yeah, I was struck, like I was saying with you earlier, about that one young person who talked about, one person was like, yeah, that's pretty much what I thought.
Right.
And the other person was like, well, I knew it looked really bad. I knew it sounded horrible, but I really believed that once he got in there,
he wasn't gonna
the political machine would squeeze the radical out of him and make him be like
do right.
Do right. And and the reality is it's a wake up call when that didn't happen. They were enthused to win. They had all they had every they had the House, they had the Senate, they had the executive office. So there's really no motivation to try to play ball. And so we just saw racism on display pretty much immediately. We saw, we continue to see sexism.
Absolutely.
And, religious discrimination. I mean,
Absolutely.
so,
it's the haves and the have-nots. So it's not, because also the poor, it's not just, it's poor. Anybody who is not, so it's not just Black, and it's not just women, and it's not, it's a financial disparity. It's monetary disparity. So if you don't have money, like I said, mentioned Woodstock earlier, if you live in Woodstock, Alabama, they're not checking for them either, no matter what color they are. And so that's what, and I think those are the people that we need to try and reach and pull up and then let them understand that you may have him in office and he may talk your talk. He does not walk your walk. But when you are so disenfranchised, that all you want is to hear somebody say what you want, even if they don't do it. It's an abusive relationship.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I just feel like, too, like, for everyone that opted out of voting, for everybody that opted out of participating in the political process, and, whoever's listening to us, obviously they are participating in the process, but we all know friends and family, associates that, because of our community, our culture, our anger with America, right? Yeah. We don't participate because we feel as though it's not going to work anyway. But, we've got to push back against that feeling, because the only way to make change. Something happen is to participate in the process. The process might suck, but you still have to be in there. And so, I mean, all of the folks that checked out when Bernie didn't win, I personally was annoyed very much with the Green Party people and people that I know that are liberal people that went with the Green Party. I mean, again, I guess they participated, but, if anything, to me, I'm sure there were lots of other people that I thought, it was going to work itself out, and they're probably still thinking that, and folks need to wake up.
I believe that in the next presidential election. I mean, I'm hoping, midterm election, but folks that didn't vote in the presidential election probably are not checking for the midterm. But I'm thinking that because of what happened, I think we might see an uptick in voters.
I hope so.
I'm hoping that. Right? So you think that's what's going to happen?
I don't know. I mean, and I'm somebody who I've always have pretty radical left anarchistic. I really, like, seriously, I'm and I. But I'm thinking of a friend in particular who was just, I'm not going to vote. Neither of them going to do anything for Black folks. Da, 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 da. And I'm just like, and even as anarchistic as I am, still it matters. It matters who's in office. It matters who's running the government. It matters who's on the Supreme Court. Absolutely. And it affects all of us. It affects women. It affects children. It affects
to our core,
poor
and we
people.
Don't
it affects like people of all ethnicities. It affects the climate. It does matter, and I just So
so better or worse? Or
I hope that people will sort of take this 100 days or take this 4 years and at least
maybe
try to be involved.
So do you think it's better, worse, or same?
Than what I imagined?
Yeah.
I think it's far worse than what I had imagined. I think a part of me had thought, well, maybe folks, this will just be a wake-up call, and folks will wake up and do more protesting, organizing. But I realize people are, but it doesn't matter because the backslide is going to be so severe that even if people protest, it'll take years to undo what's going to happen in the next 4 years.
And we have to move beyond protest too. You know what I mean?
I
love the protest. You know what I'm saying? But we actually have to figure out what other action. I think the protests are good for the camera. We will get to, but what's the behind the scenes? I think the elections, as you discussed, the following up on different court picks, things like that, are the things that will really. Beyond the protest, starts to make a difference.
And I would just say, too, that coming from the anarchistic, I'm still going to give a shout out to the anarchists.
I'm in.
The Black Lives Matter folks, the anarchist folks, they have been holding it down. All the water protectors, all the water protectors. You know what? There's something to be said for direct action, and I'm with you in terms of protests, and I'm fine with all the sort of. The political side dealing with the democratic process, but I also strongly believe that there has to be more direct action, and I so give it up to all the young people out there who put their bodies on the line, young people and old people who put their bodies on the line, and I think that there's going to have to be a really strong organizations, people taking direct action and just facing down folks. I think that has to be a part of the
going and laying down
and
not moving.
Yeah, and there's something called the anarchists have a phrase, and it's called it's essentially saying there's multiple strategies,
right?
And so just to respect that if these folks are going to go over here and do property destruction or whatever they're going to do to make their point, or chain themselves to bulldozers so that they can't start building on this pipeline. And if these folks over here are going to sort of work and go talk to their senators and really push, or if these folks are going to decide to run for office, that it's called diversity of strategies, diversity of tactics.
Like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X.
Exactly. Yeah. Everybody wants to hate on the folks doing direct action, but then everybody looks back at Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and feel like we had to have both of them. So that's sort of my little radical push, is just acknowowledging the different strategies that
we needed it. We needed it. And everyone needs to play their part. Yeah. And pick a position. You know what I mean? Pick something to be fired up about.
So that's a thing. Do something.
Yeah. No that moves us to our last piece, which is act up. What are we going to do? We always do try to leave people with some things that you can do, between now and the next time we talk. And so one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention is the Indivisible website. So it's I'm going to spell Indivisible. INDIVISIBLE.GUIDE.com. So that's indivisibleguide.com. And then they have a / stop-Trump care. And so there's several tools on this site, including talking points for calls and visits to your congressional representative, how every member voted. So you talked about that earlier.
It's important to know.
The 10 worst things, about the Trump care. And then they really encourage folks to understand that there's another recess that's happening. There's 11 days of recess that started last week. So it's another, even though there just was Easter recess. There's a lot of recessing happening in the Congress.
They work so hard.
My kids don't get as much recess.
No,
okay, I'm just saying. But folks are on recess for 11 days. They're doing town hall meetings, maybe.
Are they right?
Maybe
they should be doing town hall.
And so this is a great time for you to show up. I think a lot of senators and representatives are very sensitive about Medicaid. It's a really great place to push.
Yep.
I think a lot of folks are really sensitive about pre-existing conditions. We didn't even talk about Jimmy Kimmel, but even just I saw Lindsey Graham or somebody on talk about I want someone like Jimmy Kimmel's son to be covered and whatever. But point being that there's a lot of sensitivity around pre-existing conditions. We need to push for that. So I just want to encourage folks to go on that website, download some of that, and talk to your representatives during this 11-day recess.
Show up at their offices, their local, wherever they are. I mean, go there. If they're not coming to you and you can, and they're not going to give you the respect, because they should be holding town halls. This is not really, it's a recess. It's not a vacation. So they're working, and they should be working for you wherever you are. And if they're not, you need to call them out. And that would be what I say to you. I mean, if you are really feeling like you need to be represented and your representative is not doing it, go to them if they don't come to you, and call and be annoying if you have the time. And if you can't, or if you have 5 of your friends and you guys rotate it out and do it, but be loud, and get to know this American Health Care Act intimately. Know it and find out how it's going to affect you, because we know it is. Everybody's affected. So that's what I would say.
Okay. Any, well, I think that's, some really great final words right there. I mean, we've had a lot of fun as usual, Jaime, just wanted to say thank you again.
Thank you.
It's been fun having you here, and really you continue to underscore the importance of paying attention, right, and getting involved in this area for our young people, for our community. So
I'm going to say we're not going to be here next week. And next Sunday is Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to you, Sheila.
Happy Mother's Day to you, Sabriya.
Thank you. And happy Mother's Day to my mom and my sisters and all the wonderful women out there who are in the grind. And happy Mother's Day to you. Anybody who's a mother of the children that even they didn't birth. All your children in the juvenile justice system that you are mothering and working through. Happy Mother's Day to you for that.
Thank you.
And shout out to my mom too, and for I guess closing the community of mothers, right? That's what you were saying. It's like that's again part of the show. Black Women Talk Politics. We are a community of women care. Yep. And so happy Mothers to everybody. We'll talk to you next time.